I'm really happy to be here today with Peter Berkman. Peter is a fellow at the Center for the Study of Digital Life, and he's also the editor of the journal there called the Dia Noeticon. And most interesting to me is he's written and performed a drama at the University of Notre Dame on Marshall McLuhan and Romano Guardini. And Romano Guardini is the topic of our conversation today. So just as a little background, a few years ago, actually maybe just a couple of years ago, one of the viewers of my Barfield series sent me a video of Peter talking about Romano Guardini and said, this is very similar to what you've been doing on your channel for several years. And I just was amazed at the confluence of ideas. I mean, how we've been talking about these things since the channel started almost 5 years ago. And then I find out that Romano Guardini was writing about these things back at the turn of the century. I probably could have saved myself a lot of time if I'd read his book. So Romano Guardini is a 20th century theologian. And the part that's particularly interesting to me is his delineation of the difference between oppositions and contradictions. And that was what I asked Peter to especially address today, because Guardini wrote a lot and is a very important figure in 20th century theology. But so we can't possibly go over all of it, but that was the particular part that I wanted to discuss today. And but Peter, before we get started, maybe you want to give just a little bit of background on how you grew up and how you came to be interested in people like Guardini. I mean, he's one of those people, like I think you said in your video, he's kind of like one of the world's best kept secrets, because it's very hard to find material on him.
Yeah, so hard to find material on him in English that I actually had to make it myself. He was an Italian man born in Italy, and his family moved to Germany. They're sort of a well-off family. They moved to Germany. His dad was a big merchant guy. I will explain a bit about me, but I want to talk about the best kept secret sort of thing that is Guardini. Just like you, I was like, man, I wish I had come across this earlier. This would have saved a lot of confusion for me over the years. But yeah, so a bit about me. I am 35. I'm an adult man. It's pretty cool. My main job, I'm a musician. I play in a band called Anamanaguchi, and I've been doing that now for about 20 years. I started that in high school. I grew up in Chappaqua, New York, which is about, an hour outside of New York City. And yeah, I was raised in a like sort of, non-practicing Catholic family where, I say non-practicing, but my mom was a CCD teacher. I assisted her there. I went through all the sacraments and stuff, like confirmation, etc. But yeah, when I went off to college, all that stuff sort of stopped for me. So I went to NYU, which is actually where I first encountered the stuff surrounding Guardini without being aware of it. I studied music technology, but at NYU, all the music schools are not situated in their own like arts school. They're actually in the education school called Steinhardt, which is like the liberal arts sort of center at NYU. And as part of a requirement for the degree, you had to take a course that was called Performance Art in Western Civilization. And it was in that course that I first read people like Heidegger and was introduced to people like Marshall McLuhan for the first time by our professor, Dr. Tom McFarlane. And Heidegger, I had to say, was really dense, really confusing. And when I did understand it, it just seemed completely wrong. And the reason I bring that up is maybe about 10 or so years later, I rediscovered the work of Marshall McLuhan and got sort of dove headfirst into it, because everything that he said about technology and human beings' relationship to it just seemed so relevant at like the very confusing times of 2015 and 2016 in the United States. I was like, wow, this is super prescient. And as I kept reading, I discovered that McLuhan was a devout Catholic, and the work that he had done on the Middle Ages and like the Trivium was very much like the basis of all of the insights that he was able to come up with in his own time. So that amazed me. But back to Heidegger. Eventually, reading McLuhan led me to Guardini because of stuff that Pope Francis. So Guardini has been influential behind the scenes. So this is why he's the best kept secret to every pope since Vatican II. The first pope of Vatican II, Paul VI, wanted to make him a cardinal, but at the time he was too old for it and sick, and he refused. Declined, I guess was the better word. Pope John Paul II quoted him a couple times. Pope Benedict XVI was an actual student of Guardini's in Germany in the 20th century. And then Pope Francis went to Germany in the 1980s to write a dissertation on Romano Guardini that he had to abandon. So it was upon discovering Guardini in Pope Francis's encyclical letter on sort of the environment and humanity and technology, which is called Laudato Si. There's a chapter in there called The Human Roots of the Ecological Crisis, where he introduces the term technocratic paradigm. And in that section, Guardini is the footnote for every paragraph. And I was like, who is this Guardini guy? Everything he's saying is so on point and fresh and clear. And when I I dove into this man's biography and his life, reading his letters to people, reading his memoirs, which were all of these were only in German. I had to use the help of computers and other people to get these readable in English. I don't speak German, although I do now read a bit of it. But I discovered there that Guardini was in fact Martin Heidegger's senior peer at the University of Freiburg in 1912 or so. And the work that we're going to be discussing today, Guardini actually sent to a young Martin Heidegger as a sort of Easter gift to him in 1912. And he sort of said, what do you think about this? I'm trying to discover what the mysterious spirit of Catholicism consists of. And, you know, he wished him a happy Easter. And fast forward 30 years later, and Heidegger is, I believe, made the rector of the University of Berlin under Nazi rule. And Guardini is kicked out from his faculty position and had to live in hiding under Nazi rule. So, yeah, it was a weird thing that after like 70 or so years later, really about 100 years later from that letter being sent, after the man receiving the letter is the one that we talk about in universities in the United States. And the man who sent the letter is something that I have to dig and spend an enormous amount of work on, mostly thanklessly, I should say. You are a welcome email that has brought this back to the surface for me. I haven't thought about Guardini in about a year. But yeah, this just goes to the root that there's something to the fact that maybe we'd rather hear the simpler version from Heidegger as opposed to the more psychologically challenging reality that Guardini is presenting in his work. So yeah, I guess
let me try something a little bit meta here on this issue, because I want you to listen to something that you said.
Okay. Uh-oh.
Okay. And then I want you to listen to a very brief clip of Ian McGilchrist in a conversation that he had on my channel a couple of months ago. And let's see what we can make of this together.
Great.
I'm going to bring up a share screen here, and I think it's the other one of you that I want to look at here. This one right here. I believe this is it. We're going to listen to 2 minutes of you.
Oh boy.
Guardini doesn't like these words, though. He says something has to be drawn out to actually fully account for that experience. And
so is the sound good? Can you hear well?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Give it, to vouch for it as something that is ultimately real and not just woo, not ineffable. So since mathematical proof can describe dead things just as well as it can describe live things, he wanted to split that difference and make that case.
This was very interesting, and I'll get to it later, but it actually was the other one I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
Sorry, very
That's
sorry.
fine.
Is a phenomenon which is extended all throughout reality with a particular significance in the sphere of that which is living, which then takes on decisive importance in the sphere of what is personal. And he talks about how this is a unity born in tension, that they exist on an axis. And then he says, the concept of opposition acquires a purely and simply decisive significance from its distinction from that of contradiction. Yes and no, good and evil, being and non-being are not oppositions, but contradictory. They exclude each other. He who gives assent to one denies the other. The opposed also exclude from one another, but only relatively, with reference to a moment of their relation, the axis, the center. In the same way, it's absolutely wrong to mention poles in the face of contradictory elements. In the face of opposed determinations, one affirms, the other excludes. Exclusion, nevertheless, takes place in such a way as to become possible only by reference to that former determination, therefore to presuppose and co-signify it, but as its opposite. On the other hand, contradiction excludes in a pure and simple sense, and precisely in such a way that the positive part is determined by itself, not by the other thing. That is, the yes is determined by the yes. The good is determined by the good, and the being is determined by the being, while the no is not actually determined by the no, but is only determined by the yes. The evil only determined by the good. Non-being only determined by the being. That's where these privations receive their definition, from the thing that they have reduced from.
This is brilliant.
Okay, so that's a quote from Guardini that you read, and it was such a nice, tight quote. It's the reason I wanted to use that one.
Great.
But then here is the discussion that DC Schindler and I'm going to back this up to the part where I ask my question, I think.
All right.
Hopefully I got the right spot.
Sorry, my landlord just got here and my dog is going insane.
Oh.
But that's okay.
You
I
need
can
to do something? We can take a pause.
No, this will be fine. Yeah.
Okay.
And division, but division can't embrace union and division. Love can embrace.
Okay, I didn't go far enough back. So could be used for artists. And in that sense, I think that I love what you say about the coincidence of opposites, Ian, that they don't come together equally. They're proportional. But I do wonder, there is one opposite that seems to me it can't be that way, and that would be good and evil. Do you guys have anything to say about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, to me, that is an example of what I'm saying. I mean, first of all, what I'm not saying, just to go back to something you just said, what I'm not saying is that when there is a coincidence of opposites, they are sort of asymmetrical in the sense that you can see one as big and the other as lesser. They are both important fully equally to one another, but in the end, in either the bigger picture in time or the bigger picture in space, one of them can always embrace the other. So, for example, union can embrace union and division, but division can't embrace union and division. Love can embrace hatred and perhaps redeem it. That's what Christians believe. But hatred can't embrace love. Good can embrace evil, take it up into itself and take it in and make it something else. But evil can't take good up into itself in any way at all. It resists it and repels it. So that's the way I would answer that question, but I'd like to hear what David says.
So this is the reason I wanted to talk with you. This is the very reason I wanted to talk with you. I don't know if you've listened to any of Ian McGilchrist, but he talks a lot about this idea of the coincidence of opposites and how opposites, it'd be a similar idea to some of what Guardini talks about in terms of the creativity of opposition, or like in computer lingo, opponent processing, and how one thing strengthens the other. So that's particularly why I wanted to ask him about this issue of good and evil, because it has always seemed to me that there are some things that can't live in that tension of opposites, like truth and falsehood. Seems like truth is on a pillar someplace, on a rock, and falsehood is everything else. And if truth steps off the rock, it's somewhere out in this sea of falsehood now. And good and evil work that way. And that's why I asked him about it. So given his answer, can that make sense with Guardini's ideas, or is it in opposition to Guardini's ideas?
First of all, I want to say I really enjoyed Dr. McGilchrist's answer there, particularly about good and evil, that good can embrace evil and perhaps redeem it. And
love can embrace hatred and redeem it.
Correct. Yeah. So this is there was another thing in the talk. I actually listened to this entire recording that you made with Dr. McGilchrist and Schindler. I love both of their work. And there was something that McGilchrist said that I particularly enjoyed, which was the illusion brought about by the introduction of the definite article in Greek, the beautiful, the, etc. That it is through the introduction of abstractions that this confusion can take place. So I want to answer your question more directly first, and I've thought about it a bit in advance of this. So Guardini, it's important to recognize that these concepts are not necessarily new, though for Guardini's introduction of them in the 20th century, they seemed really new. They seemed novel, but their novelness was only because of how it was cast in like relevant language. Like it wasn't in Greek, but in German that he was speaking about these things, and in as relevant as possible German. So there is a Platonic notion of opposition, and maybe an Aristotelian one. And Guardini begins his book on opposition not by defining the term opposition, but by taking one particular opposition and emphasizing it. And it's the one of sensible and intellectual knowledge. That this is the prime example where one must presuppose the other. in Aristotle, he says the soul can understand nothing without a phantasm. That is, the immaterial intellect doesn't work unless there is a sensible reality to point to reference, to live in. And likewise, the human being without the intellect is not necessarily a human being. This opposition is very different from the Platonic notion of intellect and form, where reality, it's particularly the Neoplatonic notion that the material world is something to transcend and get past entirely, where we can see the beautiful, etc., and exist in this realm separate somehow from matter. Okay, so the reason I say this is Aristotle has a very important term in Greek that he invented, which is called entelechy. And this relates to what we're talking about here of oppositions, because in English, we never really got a good translation of this word, entelechy, until Joe Sachs, who's also a Heidegger scholar. He translated into English as being at work, staying itself. Being at work, staying itself. So that is a coincidence of opposites. How can something be both at work and stay itself? How can something persist despite undergoing change? This is a textbook example of an opposition, or an enantiological relationship, if we're talking Greek. So it implies a thing remaining the same, but also changing. So Guardini points at the problem between conflating oppositions and contradictions is like the problem of Western civilization. And I will get to this. I'll point to something that he wrote near his death, where he's trying to explain this work and boil it down to the most important points. But he basically says, when we conflate opposition and contradiction, we enter the most dangerous territory as human beings. So
yeah, it was that quote that really stuck out to me, because that's where we're at right now.
Yeah,
in the world.
It is. So what if we were to consider, let's take this term, being at work, staying itself. What if we were to consider remaining the same good? And thus we resist all forms of change. Like we've made the decision that staying itself is good. They equal each other. We decide that staying itself is good, and we resist all forms of change. But on the opposite, what if we were to consider remaining the same evil, and we sought out all forms of possible change just for the fact of change being good? That is a sort of one example of a clear conflation, where one is, at least in Aristotle or Guardini, this would be an example of an opposition, not a contradiction. But what if we were to treat it like a real contradiction? What if we were to say, these don't demand and presuppose one another? These, in fact, one has to go. That's where you get, I think, real violent behavior in humanity. This is a thing where the whole is lost. Guardini brings it, has a really beautiful point on this in the beginning of his work. He talks about all of his examples are sort of related to the human body. So he talks about our self-experience of a fingertip. He's like, let's think about a round shape. But by analogy, as all of this is analogy, in what way is it round? So he's talking about a fingertip as a round shape. But he says, in what way is it a kind of rounded shape? Well, it's apparently an uninterrupted surface. I'm able to put it on a string playing a guitar, and I can change what part of it I'm using. And then there's a bone inside of it, which is sharp and not round. But he even says, just staying at the fingertip, he says, but upon a closer look, that coherent surface is actually divided into groups of shapes, elevations and depressions, larger and finer folds. The connection is diminished and endangered, he says, upon a closer inspection. The small organs of the skin appear, then the cell groups, then the cells themselves, then the cellular parts, etc. Each of these structural levels means a danger, a reduction in context. If the consideration goes further, it reaches the area of the last fine structure of matter. In the end, the connection between the line, the surface, or the body would have disappeared. So this is something Guardini wrote in 1925. And you can read that and think instantly about the nuclear bombs. It's a little ridiculous that this amount of thinking was around at that time, and the 20th century happened as it did. Yeah. So
that phrase, a reduction in context, I think is fascinating, because that's exactly what happens when science goes too far on the mathematical side and reduces everything to measurement and taking it apart to the smallest possible component, and you lose context. And when you no longer have context, then what do the measurements even mean?
Right. And this was not something, rather, this was something Guardini developed very, very much in his career. He used all of this as a basis to say other stuff. And he wrote a book called Power and Responsibility, where he talked about, once you are able to grasp these finer details in matter, you can gain mastery and control over them. But when you've done that at the sake of reducing it from its context, you're really in charge of something that you can't possibly be responsible for. And that's an extreme danger. And he phrases it beautifully in this book, The End of the Modern World. He says, contemporary man has not been trained to use power well. Even worse, the actual quote is amazing. He doesn't even seem loosely aware of the problem itself. That's the real point here. So, but I really want to emphasize, as I have a couple times here already, that there's something so not new about the work Guardini did. And to be more specific, there's something very medieval about the work that Guardini has done here. Not only in its metaphysical underpinning, which is really Aquinas and his understanding of Aristotle, but even in the way that his writing is structured. Everything is very dependent and organic, like structured in a way that you sort of need to read the paragraph before. And he says, like, in 5 paragraphs, something that could be summed up in 1 sentence, but he's breaking everything apart sort of like the person who looks into the finer folds of the fingertip, but he's doing it in such a way that everything is accountable. Everything it has been thought through, that he's actually responsible for everything that he's saying. And that's, I think, the medieval talent that was cultivated at the universities of the 12th and 13th centuries, when they were invented. I mean, so that all of this is very much not new, I think it is important. And I think it gives hope that by revisiting Aristotle and Aquinas through this lens, we can sort of build an appropriate anthropology for a time where human beings coexist with machines that are made by human beings and are capable of killing human beings. Guardini even begins his book on oppositions by delineating them from, delineating living things from machines. He talks about how this like tension of oppositions does not exist in the machine, where the parts are either next to, behind, on top, or in sequence of one another. Even today, when the machines are much more sophisticated, when they have cameras and microphones, various sensors, but these sensors are not organs. They meet organs from the people who build and control and monitor the machine, but only to the point that the person monitoring the machine can be accountable for the scientific basis for these things that they may not understand. Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I would sort of bring it there. But the world of good and evil today, I think that's an important contradiction. But I think our time, the living and non-living, is that contradiction has taken on an extraordinary relevance, because there's not an opposition between living and not living, perhaps.
So you're saying that living and non-living is a contradiction rather than an opposition?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first I'm going to say something that about the difference between opposition and contradiction, and then I want to go back and talk about that living and non-living thing. I sent your video to a couple people back when I first watched it, and here's what I said to them. I said, I think this is a very important video, especially between about 47 and 57, and I'll put this in the description section of the video. He delineates between opposition, which would roughly be polar entities that bring life and variety, and contradictions, which must never be considered as polar unless we fall into the error of Jung and Goethe,
Yes,
that good has evil within it. He says if we lose the distinction between opposition, or creative tension, and contradiction, or the yes versus no, good versus evil, being versus non-being, we lose Western civilization. Now that's very strong. So let's go back to the living and non-living. Are you familiar with the work of Michael Levin?
No, I'm not.
Okay, well, you will want to look at his work. He is a genius of the highest order in the field of biology, developmental biology, synthetic biology. His main goal is to find a way to regenerate limbs to help people, which is great.
Yep.
He's gotten very far along on this. But on the way, as he's been doing all the research for this, he's come up with an acronym that he calls TAME, T-A-M-E. I can't remember what the T and the A stand for, but the M-E is mind everywhere. Because he's found in his research that intelligence or agency actually can go all the way down to the cellular level and below. And in thinking this through, he's come up with a little, I don't know what you'd call it, a chart, a graph, something that moves from non-persuadability to persuadability, and how much it takes to persuade an entity to move or to do something. And along this spectrum lie both living and non-living things. The non-living being, so he says, for example, you can take a human being and you can attach bionic limbs or a mechanical heart. We're getting to the place where we can add electrodes to the brain that make us human plus non-living things in us. But you can also take a Roomba, conceivably, sometime in the future, and add living cells or living DNA or some sort of a thing that would bring some intelligence to the Roomba that it didn't have otherwise. And that the day is coming when everywhere along that spectrum, there will be something that is both living and non-living attached together. So where does that put us with Guardini's ideas about living and non-living being a contradiction, and that if it begins to live in the world of polar opposites, we've got problems?
Yes. I would argue that we don't need to add organic tissue to a Roomba to already be there. We have satellites, we have computers. McLuhan always took this sort of organic view of technology as being extensions of ourselves already. He said, you know, they can't be anything less than things that augment already existing human powers, while diminishing others at the cost, or retrieving powers that we had forgotten and flipping in to powers when pushed to their limits. So these various technologies that we've surrounded ourselves with, these artificial beings, these man-made constructions, we have to discover what they are made of. And the best way to discover what they're made of is to discover their effects on us. So broadly speaking, the challenge in a world of digital technology, in this digital environment, is simply to remember how to be human. It's less an issue of the figuring out the Roomba and more figuring out the human. We're reminded of our own distinction from automation when we are surrounded by it. The question just forces itself in digital conditions. What is a human being? And yeah, I agree. It is already quite dangerous to consider things like robot rights when human rights have not been taken to their fullest depth. So I'm wondering how deep to go. on this, but
well, I mean, we don't have to go any deeper than you want to go, and I do want to leave time somewhere along the line for you to go into the 8 oppositions, because
yes.
yeah,
I would like to do that, but I think as deep as I'd like to go is I would like to mention Pope Francis's work on all of this, because he is arguably the best living Guardini scholar. He said that if he hadn't become Pope, he would have finished his dissertation on Guardini. And now he has to kind of do it in office. But so there's something. Are you familiar with the notion called Catholic social teaching?
yes, not deeply, but I do understand the basic idea. Yeah.
So there are sort of 3 tenets to it. The first is human dignity. The second is subsidiarity, and the third is solidarity. Now, human dignity, I think, is it comes first for a reason, and that is that no human being can be prescinded from humanity. That is, we cannot choose to say to exclude a group of people from humanity, scientifically, socially. It is a reduction that only leads to ruin. And in our
So an example of that would be when the Nazis tried to call the Jewish people subhuman,
yeah.
or
That's
when babies in the womb are considered to be subhuman, that kind of thing.
yeah. Or African slaves shipped over to America in the 1800s, where these are people who can be bought and sold, and or they're not people, in fact, according to American thought at the time. Yeah, precisely. So now, even without any political tensions in mind, we have people who are willing to reduce themselves to machine. There are people who call themselves wetware, or flesh bots or something like that. It's a common thought in technological circles to think of human beings as a lesser order organism than our own inventions, that our inventions will surpass us. But that is a categorical error. They may be able to process information quicker. They may be able to sense more. They may be able to move and act in ways that exceed human powers. But we still have intellect. We still have understanding. That is to say, we have intelligence. And I believe Dr. McGilchrist pointed to the category error of artificial intelligence being a total misname for what a computer actually does. What a computer actually does is remember. It is a super remember machine, and that's a basic fact we would do well to understand, and it would help us in our ability to tame these things, to bring them, corral them before they do even more damage than they've already done. But yeah, this human dignity concept, we have to be able to assert our own responsibility, and I think so much of this desire to say, oh well, we can't control the machine, and it's here to replace us, it's here to be the next stage of evolution, whatever, is really a kind of just intellectual laziness. People would rather not be bothered. And the saddest part is when that actually happens in a university, where this is the place where people have enough leisure time to not be lazy, if that makes sense. So yeah, I wonder if that makes sense.
Yes, I'm with you so far. So you talked about human dignity. Did you also want to touch on subsidiarity and solidarity, or?
Sure. Very briefly, I think subsidiarity refers to these sort of orders of being, where the notion that the smallest possible group should make a decision that is the one that is closest to an issue, who has the most concrete knowledge of an issue, should be responsible for it. It's a statement of the ability of experience to dictate action.
Like
And
in the old days when we had local school boards,
yeah, sure.
as an example.
And solidarity is that of, if somebody has an issue, we stand with them. We've already seen the Writers Guild take a stand against the robots quite effectively. And we're seeing the actors try and do the same. Hopefully that will succeed. But yeah, the robots have very much already taken over. We have to find ways to help the people. So that's an active process that Pope Francis has really emphasized in his 10 years as Pope.
I don't really want to, like you said, I don't want to get into all the political ramifications of any of this, but it does seem to me that there are some dangers in the solidarity idea of falling over into undiscriminating allyship.
Yeah, it's I think the human part. I want to emphasize the technological dimension of all of this. That we really stand to destroy all of us if we aren't able to take account of the stuff that we built. Guardini actually relates this in his book, The End of the Modern World. He says, classical man was, made sort of totems and monsters out of the threats that they encountered in the natural world, the bears, the lions, etc. And we built technological safeties to protect us from these dangers. But Guardini says now the dangers arise from within. We are just like that prehistoric person, except we've created the dangers ourselves. And just like the prehistoric person who wears the skin of the bear that scares him, we become part of the machines that dominate us, and we take on their habits, and we do so unconsciously. This is sort of McLuhan's.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that has struck me is one of the clear and present dangers of AI is, or AGI, whichever one, is not so much what it might rise up and do against us, but just the fact that we use it all the time means that we're losing our own capacity to think things through and to organize our thoughts and to write out. People use it now to write their essays, to come up with ideas for them and all of this. So we're just sort of giving over our mental capacity to the machinery, because then we think, oh, we'll have more time to think about other things, but then we're not thinking about other things, and we're using the machines to entertain us while the machine is doing our work. And
Yeah, I remember in math class, they used to say, well, you have to show your work because you're not going to have a calculator on you all the time. And they were wrong. I actually do have a calculator on me all the time. So jokes on everybody, I get that.
yeah, except for the day that I was walking through the store and all of a sudden all the power went down in the whole city for some reason. The grid went down.
Mm-hmm.
And the clerks at the front could easily have added up our purchases and given us a receipt, but none of them knew how to add. So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
because when they went to school, because they're younger than you are, they had calculators all the time. They never had to learn how to add a column of figures. And
Which I don't even think that's the way it's taught anymore in the math programs at elementary schools. But yeah, there's a new system that I don't understand. So but what you're talking about draws a very important fact of human beings' relationship with technology, where we are not made clear what its effect on us is until it's removed. So when I first read McLuhan, I thought about, you know, a very expensive penthouse suite in, you know, New York City, the like 100th floor or whatever. It becomes much less valuable when the power goes out. That elevator doesn't work, and now you have something that has disconnected you from the rest of your surroundings. All of these things depend on a context, as Guardini was talking about with the fingertip. But the difference between, I guess you could say, context provided from God and context provided by humanity is one is vouched for without our thinking of it. I think McGilchrist said something to the effect of, you know, a human being grows without trying, something like this, where and it grows according to a plan that we don't necessarily decide. You know, that embryo will get a hand, and that hand will, taking in food over time in the body, will turn into a larger hand, a more fully formed, articulated hand. And that's because it's nourished by an all-nourishing, ever-present figure, a vital force. That vital force only exists in human affairs when we are paying attention to it. And humanity has a really tough time keeping attention on, that is, we are very easily distracted. Are you familiar with the Sebald, the Rings of Saturn? I'm reminded of that book, but it's a good one. Anyways,
is that a science book or a book of philosophy, or?
It's actually it's been a while since I've even thought about it. It's a W.G. Sebald wrote, I think around 2000 or so. This book, The Rings of Saturn, is kind of a, I'll see what Wikipedia describes it as. It's a first-person narrative arc that is the account of a nameless narrator on a walking tour of Suffolk. That's not really to describe it. Here it is, a hybrid book of fiction, travel, biography, myth, and memoir. It's a very striking. I recommend it to anybody. Take a look. He was he's a German, born in 1944, and his parents were Holocaust survivors, I believe. So all of this takes place in the context of people building things, and the slaughter that can take place without us even noticing.
Hmm.
as we are building. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up the idea of attention and how the world depends on our attention. And that's certainly one thing that we've been talking a lot about here. My channel loosely covers the intersection of Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot, and I would say maybe Paul Vanderklay and Bishop Barron and kind of a group like that, and John Vervaeke.
Yep.
Yeah, and John
A bunch of Canadians, yes.
Yes. And they all point towards attention. They all have a slightly different perspective on it, but they all point towards attention. One of my favorite interlocutors on this channel is a young philosopher named Matthew, and he has this little saying. He says, "Seeing gathers." So basically, seeing curates our world, and what we focus on, what we see, is what brings the world that we live in into being, basically.
Yeah, and what we see and what we pay attention to, and all the baggage that we come to that seeing with.
Yes. That's what I call the experiential DNA that each of
Yeah.
us is loaded with by the time we're adults. Yeah.
Yeah, so we can see a flower on a table, and the botanist or that person sees, oh, that's this particular kind of flower. What's that doing here? But then you have a sort of fabric worker or textile person who notices the tablecloth and doesn't pay attention to this strange flower. And yeah, it's this is the work of sort of Gestalt psychology, which is in Oliver McLuhan, but it's also in Guardini in this book on oppositions. Like, I want to describe this book on oppositions as sort of a summa of Guardini's in the medieval sense. This is a sort of his summa on creation, on and we can get into the different different oppositions that he brings up, but basically there are three that apply, that are valid in general for all existence, three that are valid for only living things, and then two that are really about the oppositions themselves. But when it comes back to this question of that, as you say, experiential DNA, this is actually, there are cute examples like I gave of the table with the flower and the tablecloth. But when it comes to the world of science, I want to quote Guardini here. He says, "For our question, this means the following. Nothing is more fictitious than the assumption that our seeing and thinking are unprejudiced, or the requirement that it should be so." That is, should we get rid of our DNA? No. But he says, only human beings in general could be without prejudice. And again, only with regard to the objective human world. But that itself is a prejudice with reference to the world in general. This only faces God without prejudice. In the human, however, there is not even man in general. There is only the concrete man. And they are essentially prejudiced, essentially related to an individual world, an environment, so much so that they have certain aspects of the human world to which that endeavor is directed, which is called science, that they don't see at all, others weakly, others strongly, but this means too strong an overall ratio. This bias works over everything, so much so that practice teaches us to recognize the determining character type from the subtle tones of a thought or judgment or preference, so much so that the question arises whether this dependency can be overcome at all. Does worldview go to the core of apparently exact scientific judgments not ultimately mean the function of a type with all of its social individual components? And he continues, in any case, this much is clear, that this dependency goes very far, is infinitely tenacious, and the stronger and more inescapable it is, the more naively the claim of non-prejudice is made. The more the criticism of the prerequisites and the course of thinking in general, and then of particular research methods, is practiced, but the whole sphere of the particular requirements and the concrete research processes remain overlooked, because these are on a completely different level than the former. And if they are not refined, they generally exercise their false influence despite the most critical prudence. The question is not whether there are prejudices, but what they are. Not whether the researcher can get rid of prejudices, but whether he has them right. We want to say whether the moment of prejudice has been consciously, critically coped with and placed. So ultimately, Guardini is saying, we cannot erase our experiential DNA. But when we are relating to the outside world, we must present it, whether that's the perspective of an individual or a group or a nation or a university. I think he says something to the effect of the individual stands in a topsoil. And we see the effect. We do not see that topsoil unless we are actively looking for it. So especially in the world of science, where the products are intellectual, we really need their sensory backdrop. In fact, the sensory backdrop is maybe more important than the scientific product itself.
When you say the sensory backdrop, what do you mean?
I mean that experiential DNA. Like
I see. Okay.
Where did that come from? Who is this, and how did they arrive? This is the showing of the work, but not
part of what I think about with the experiential DNA that I've always tried to kind of get an answer to, and I can't think it through myself, sort of, is that it seems to me that we're born with some sort of a, words fail, let me use the word mechanism. I know it's not a mechanism, but something inside of us that has like little attachments on it, so that as experiences happen, they get attached to this thing where we're integrating all of our experiences, because we have experiences, we have relationships, we have conversations, we sing songs, we read books, we listen to messages, we hold hands, we eat, we have all of these things that have to get integrated somewhere in us. I think that Dallas Willard says the soul is that which integrates all of these complexities in a person. But
yeah, I would say it sounds like you're describing the soul. Yeah, definitely.
But the soul is always kind of gathering or open to these experiences, and so it's always getting built out in a sense, so that there's more and more and more of me, more experiences that influence the thought that's coming into my head is influenced by, the words coming into my head from you are influenced by what's inside of me. And then when I speak, my words are influenced by that, because I'm thinking about it idiosyncratically differently than you're thinking about it. And so I'm trying to find a way to describe to you what's inside my little apparatus so that it can hit your apparatus in some way that we can actually communicate, which is kind of a miracle. That
especially since neither one of us came up with English. Yeah.
But what I'm always wondering about is, how does that, maybe that is the area where the postmodernists got it right when they said that there just are perspectives on things. But in spite of all that, in spite of the fact that we all have all these perspectives, I think you and I would both agree that there is nevertheless something called truth. So each of us, with our perspective, part of our responsibility is to take that perspective and move it closer to truth, move it closer, or allow ourselves to be drawn into the good, to be drawn into the true and the beautiful and the good, be shaped by that. So
Yeah,
we
this
don't
this has
remain-
a resonance with the Greek word logos, which happens to be the suffix for all of our scientific endeavors in English. Anyway, we use the Greek word when we're talking about psychology or biology or etc. We might as well be saying talk. By the way, there's a funny thing happening now on TikTok. People talk about book talk or movie talk or all these different fields of interest are being suffixed with the proprietary TOK of TikTok.
Oh, that kind of talk. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So that's just something funny, but there's something powerful about the notion of truth resonating with logos in a matter that can transcend language or languages even. Different grammars point us in that direction. So but the emphasis on what you're saying here of this inner and outer thing is it's something that we're not necessarily in full control over.
Mhm.
Like I had mentioned, neither one of us came up with English. There are influences outside of us, but there are also drives that arise within us. Sometimes we can explain them, other times we can't. But those tendencies, I'll just quote from Guardini here. He says, "I'm not a passive point for external processes, but also and above all, an origin of internal processes." He says, "We have certain internal drives, acts that begin inside. I stand statically in myself as a closed building, but also dynamically as an independent active unit. I do not experience myself as a fragment of existence, but as a whole built from within. I experience myself as concrete, and this concrete stands in itself from outside to inside, from inside to outside. It builds itself up and works from its own source. That means it is alive." Saying that Guardini is a theologian is very important, because around the time that he began this writing is when he decided to become a priest as well. And he points to something in the Gospel of Matthew in his memoirs that made him come to that decision. He was with a friend in the attic of some summer house in Germany. And he was talking about this particular passage in Matthew where it says, "He who holds on to his soul will lose it, and he who gives it away will keep it." And his friend went out to the balcony, and he sort of thought about it for a minute, and he says, "Give up my soul, but to who?" And then he thought about the church. He says, "I can't just give it to God, because then I would be in danger of inserting myself for that. I need something that can get me out of all of my desire to assert myself." And the church seemed like that place for Guardini. And he quotes, "With all of her concreteness and precision." And the account ends with him saying, "And then I went out to my friend and told him," which I think is beautiful, because we have this opposition within ourselves. We have an inner and an outer, but we also have the opposition of the relationship between a person and somebody else. Me and you, for instance. That's that's an opposition. Like, and any kind of relationship has this push-pull, this balance. And okay, this is important. So Guardini liked to say about his oppositions that it's not a matter of one against the other or the other against the one or whatever. And it's also not a matter of them somehow being synthesized to form a unity.
It's not it's not a dialectic.
Right. But rather, it is a unity, a special kind of unity that has a living root to it. And maybe in the Greek word, we would have called that its form, morphe, or eidos, eidos. And I think it's no mistake that Guardini is writing all this stuff at a time where science had abandoned this medieval notion of formal causality. I keep on bringing up the Middle Ages, but it's very important.
Perfectly okay. We're very, very handy with the Middle Ages here.
Great. Well, Guardini was a Bonaventure scholar. He wrote 2 dissertations on Bonaventure, one about salvation, and the other one about Bonaventure's metaphysics. These 3 notions, the lumen mentis, the gradatio ens in entium, and there was a third one. I don't remember it, but yeah, grades of being. Oh, the influence of sense and motion. This is sounding like Levin for a second. Influence of sense and motion, grades of being, and the light of the mind. Yeah, that's what Guardini wrote on Bonaventure. And so all of this is built on a scaffolding of Greek philosophy, oddly enough. I really do say oddly. It's very mysterious to me how why should this philosophy endure? Why should this seemingly, of a time thing still sound relevant today? I don't know.
Well, I wonder if it has a little bit to do with I mean, okay, my own bias, my own perspective is that throughout history, throughout the lived experience of humanity, since we were created by God, he has been communicating in diverse ways. One of the ways is just the universe itself communicates, and every living thing tells a story, and there are metaphors built into all the beautiful things in the world. And so it's no surprise at all that the Greeks would have come up with ideas that are still true and beautiful today if they came to them through that being taught by God, basically. And so that experience has been available all through history, but also all through history, mankind has more and more and more closed ourselves off from being open to hearing and understanding that kind of truth. So that's McGilchrist's whole story, that we have abstracted ourselves and gotten more up in our own heads and unwilling to be open to the mysterious, ineffable, beautiful around us. So we go back to those people who were open and and could tell us of that truth. And certainly, I mean, it seems to me that that there's a lot of crossover between many of the Greek thinkers and the truths that were revealed in the New Testament, and even in the Old Testament. I mean, truth is truth wherever we find it. So do you want to go over the 8 oppositions? We have about 10 minutes left. And
I think
one of the big reasons I want to do this is that I've spent about 4 or 5 years on my channel chasing down an idea that I've had for 20, 30 years, based on this idea that that the universe itself is like a work of art.
Yeah.
And what we've discovered over the many centuries are the elements and principles that are a part of every work of art that draw the viewer's eye or draw the listener's ear to be entranced, to see the beauty of, to come together with. And those elements and principles, the elements are just those things that are part of the work, the line, the size, the shape, and even music has these. The line, the size, the shape, the direction, the color, the value, and the texture are part of the work. And then each of those responds to a number of principles that, as I've thought about it over many years, are kind of binaries. So they each have a binary aspect to them, but I'm only going to say the one side. And that is unity, harmony, contrast, dominance, repetition, variation, gradation, and balance. And they each exist on a kind of a spectrum or a polar tension that you could say. And so in a painting, every stroke of the painting is responding to all of those principles in the context of that particular stroke and how that leads to the unity of the whole work. And then I hear you talking about these 8 tensions or binaries or polar concepts. And I thought there's some crossover there, because if this is true, if these principles are really, really underlie not only human life, but also underlie the physics of the universe, come underneath the physics, then I think it's really important that we explore what those polar tensions are. So that's my story.
Yeah. So Guardini has 8 of them. I'll go over them, but Pope Francis, who I would consider the greatest living Guardini scholar, comes up with them as often as possible. Anytime he's giving a talk, he'll say, and that's a polar tension. But he's not necessarily talking about the principle underneath. He's maybe saying this is an example of a tension. So if you read, he has an exhortation called Evangelii Gaudium, and he has these 4 that he talks about. He says, time is greater than space. So there's a time-space tension, but there's a ranking among them. So time is greater than space. Unity prevails over conflict. Realities are more important than ideas, and the whole is greater than the part. So that's Francis having his sort of concrete examples in our world. But yeah, I will bring up these ones written by Guardini, and I'll go even further and take what a 20th century Italian scholar, Guido Somavia, made of them by comparing them to things in Aristotle. So first we have the what Guardini calls the 3 intra-empirical oppositions. And the first one, I will say, so these 3 are what Somavia calls valid in general for existence. These are what he calls the predicamentals, maybe, in Aristotle. The first is dynamic and static. So something that can be at work, be dynamic, but also stay itself static. The next one, and by the way, there are German words. I'm using my own translation just for speed here.
Mm-hmm.
The next is form and abundance or overflow. So you might consider this as shape and matter, perhaps, or something like a figure ground, a determinable element, an indistinct determinable element, and a distinct determinable element. So something that has a limit and something that surpasses this limit. The third is a totality and a detail. This is something like Eliot's tradition and the individual talent. It's a gestalt. There is a specific, particular, partial in concrete, and a general, universal, total in concrete. And you can't have one without the other. The examples are the formal cause of the tradition, and in a reciprocal way as well. Then, so those are the
before you move on to the next three, I just want to throw one in here. In Barfield's book, Speaker's Meaning, he talks about an opposition or a binary that really stuck out to me as one that could encompass a lot of different binaries, and that is the tension between accuracy and expression. Because both are needed. You have to have both. But if you have complete accuracy, you have no expression. And if you have total expression, you can't count on accuracy.
So this would have to do with these next three, which have to do with living things.
Well, I suppose. But I mean, I'm thinking also of it in terms of, let's say, scientific measurement. But of course, that requires human beings, which they often refuse to acknowledge. Right? Okay, so go for it. The next three.
Cool. So these next ones he calls, so these are the trans-empirical opposites. The first ones were the intra-empirical. These are the trans-empirical. That is, they go to the realm of beyond what is empirical. The first he calls production and disposition. And Guido Somavia calls that the tension between imminent efficient causality and imminent final causality. This I could actually just go to the chapter, because these oppositions get a little prickly. But I have in my own notes here that this is almost a relationship between an artist and their audience. Like something like a probe and a teacher. So let me pull up Guardini's description of this. So if I search for disposition in my Google Doc here. So I should mention, I have this weird document that I've been keeping for years that makes Google Docs crash every time, because I basically have the German. I fully transcribed this book in German in a table on the right, and I have an English rough translation on the left, paragraph by paragraph. And I think the way that Google Docs has their tables set up, it really does not like this document. So if I search disposition, first I have to spell it,
that's a tremendous commitment to this work that you did your own translation of it.
Yeah.
And I understand from your conversation before, you're not a German speaker, so.
No, not even close. So here we go. Okay. This is the first one that he brings up in these trans-empirical contrasts. So yeah, the word in German is Gegensatz. It literally means like set against. But anytime someone's brought it up in English, they use the word opposition. So I use the words. I picked opposition when I first brought this up, as others have, but contrast is also used. Let me introduce the trans-empirical contrast for a second, because it's one thing to say they only account for the living, but it's another to describe them as he does. He says, previously, the ones that only apply for being. The intra-empirical opposites lie within the realm of experience. They concern the enantiological relationship in which forces, building materials, processes, and structures of what can be experienced relate to each other. Now we have come across a new fact, what we have called the inner point of the living. How does it relate to what can be experienced? How does this go back to it? How does it come into its own in what can be experienced? The relationship between the realm of experience and the inner point is determined enantiologically, that is, oppositionally. The opposites that unfold in this relationship may be called transempirical. The word doesn't exactly hit like most words that come from choice, but because of this appointment, we know what it means. So let's go to production and disposition. Wait, now I found a cool cool section here I kind of want to quote from. He talks about artists. Let us grasp what is meant where it is particularly clear. Human creation. What does creating mean in the special sense of the word? Thoughts, pictures, deeds, works are created in such a way that their author knows that they rise up from within. There is no ordering of existing material, but rather the creation of something new. Creative thinking is not experienced as processing what is given, but as inner lifting out, ascending. Creative act is something that springs from within, created work presented as new. The results of such production, thought, shape, action, have the character of the new. They were not there yet, cannot be derived from what is available. Before them, we feel something new beginning. An origin has become active. They stand there with an originality like previously unknown things in nature. If you come across such a thing, you are amazed, asked what it is, where does it come from? But no one asks whether it is possible, because it stands there and has an inner essential possibility, truth. Thus, creations of this kind testify to themselves. They have the power of persuasion through the compelling truth of their being. In Matthias Grunwald's pictures, fingers rise up for a creative reason. You do not realize existing types, but create new ones, open new realms of being. You have sovereignty of being. Gothic architecture is like that at times, and plastic. The people of Shakespeare, the music of Beethoven, the politics of Napoleon. This creation and production seems alive in a special sense of the word. The whole person is involved, right up to the point of agony. Beethoven was terrified when a new work was inwardly announced. The whole of life gathers in such creation. It is an inner receiving and behavior that takes everything up. Hold on, I just love reading him. So I'm going to the next paragraph because it begins with this sentence. Once our eyes are created, awesome, keep going. We find something corresponding in the whole area of human life and how physical life grows and grows in conception and birth, how shape and organs slowly form from within, and how the work of man becomes from the first suggestion to the perfect creation. Everywhere we see it protruding from within in such work, brought about by the deep point, by the lap of life. Everywhere there is something new, the attestation of which lies in himself, in the power of his own truth and being. Every living thing, being or work or deed is ultimately something new. In it, what is already available is put together, but something new is created. It does not realize an existing scheme, but represents what has not yet been. Every living thing is only once. Life means creating, and the more creative it is, the livelier it is. The more original, the first jump of the creative ground. Life is fertility, and the livelier life, the greater its power to present what has not yet been, to present what has not yet been born. The full of action and form is new creation brought out from within. So he's talking about all this new stuff. Then he says, now certainly there is no such thing as merely productive creation. All creation needs material. The body needs chemical compositions of a certain kind and quantity if it is able to build itself up. Okay, so now I want to talk about, now that we know what production is, Beethoven can't just get an idea. He needs to live in Germany at the time, or Austria at the time, wherever he was. He needs that audience. He needs their disposition in order to work upon. He cannot create ex nihilo. And this points to a sort of common contradiction that people make about art, that artists are gods. They are not able to create ex nihilo. They may be pagan gods in the sense that they shape human sense, but this is a misuse of the word God, I believe. They have the power to shape human sense because they use human sense as their material, their disposition. And this is where the tension between the idea and the sense of the audience lives, this production disposition. So, as Aristotle says, the cognitive agent is and becomes the thing known, and an artist knows their audience. In fact, they sometimes make their audience. So, yeah, that's the first one. I will be more brief about the next. I think we really just needed to introduce the notion of these trans-empirical oppositions. That is, someone who knows something. A scientist can be an artist in this way, a new scientific discovery. Someone who is able to understand something, to render it intelligible. They are living in a world of people who are having the same sensory experience as they are to a degree. They are seeing parts of the picture, but it is the artist or the scientist who is able to articulate it and translate it into a medium in which the people see it intellectually for the first time, despite having lived in it, if that makes sense. So by the time,
I mean, marketing guys that design new products that
yes,
make people hunger for more and more stuff. Yes.
exactly. Well said. Yeah, that's an art as well, and movement, etc. Market research, correct. And now robots are able to do that on the newsfeed, not just Beethoven. So next we have the opposition. Actually, let's go back to efficient and final cause. That's what Guido Somavia equated this to Aristotle. I don't know if I completely agree, but go for it. Anyway, the next is rule and originality. So a new element and a continuing element. So this sounds a lot like the one that we just talked about.
So,
but
so the continuing element would be the rule, and the new element would be the originality.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And I think in your earlier talk, you had also mentioned order and chaos.
Order and chaos. Yeah. That has a lot to do with this one.
And I think this is, I had made a note to myself that I thought this was where accuracy and expression fit in.
Yes, this is when you had said that, I zeroed in on this one with my eyes and my notes. Yes, this is that one. So this is the trans-empirical opposition that lives here. So yeah, let me pull a little. I mean, you seem to understand.
We've only got like 5 minutes left, so we probably should.
Yeah. We'll just continue.
Yeah.
The next is immanence and transcendence, which I call percepts and concepts. So this is where something becomes like shiny to us, and we grasp it, and then it becomes something that we can do again later. It transcends. We see the pattern, we sense it, and we understand it. But what Somavia says is this is the immanence of life resulting from double causality and the transcendence of life. Big phrase. And then finally, we have the oppositions themselves. Guardini calls these the transcendental oppositions. The first is affinity and differentiation. Somavia calls this the analogy of being, or the analogy of proper proportion, the analogia entis. And then finally, connectedness and discreteness, the unity of being, the university of being, the unitas entis. So you can look at these 4-part things and see their affinity and differentiation. And you can see their connectedness and their discreteness, their connectedness and their separateness. Those are 2 different ones. He gets to that level of precision in this work that still 100 years later is not properly in English. Crazy stuff.
For sure. Yeah. Yes. And what is the name of the book?
The name of the book is The Contrast, or Die Gegensatz, the oppositions.
And it's only in German.
Yep. Philosophy of the Living Concrete is the full title of it.
Maybe what you've been called to is to publish a translation of this. You've already got it done. All you need to do is find
Yeah.
a German speaker to check it over for you.
Yeah, I need a couple German friends. I have a German speaking friend who's not a native speaker, but yeah, maybe I think you might be right.
I mean, you've already got the work done. How hard would it be, right?
Yeah, that's what I think. And then sometimes it's hard. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
a German speaker could come alongside, calling all German speakers to this channel,
Please.
come alongside Peter and help him with this, because it would be great to have this translated. I mean,
Yeah.
this falls right in the slot of what all these guys are talking about. Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pajot, John Vervaeke, Ian McGilchrist. I mean, it just falls right in the slot.
Yeah, I think the world needs it.
Yeah, that's your calling, Peter.
Well, thank you for calling me to be here. I'm very happy to talk about this anytime. So yeah, I'm glad that Schindler and McGilchrist summoned me. So
Well,
thank
and I'm also thankful. I can't remember who it was who put me onto you a couple of years ago, but then just recently, another viewer named Elizabeth reminded me about you, and that was when I contacted you again, because earlier you had been traveling and it was not possible for you to be here, and
That's right.
it kind of dropped off my radar. So I just want to end up with one quote that is from a book about Guardini, I believe, that was written, I believe it was written by written by Cardinal Ratzinger before he became Pope Benedict. The truth about man is essentiality, conformity to being, or better still, obedience to being, which in primis is the obedience of our being before the being of God. Only in this way can one achieve the force of truth. And
Yeah.
when I've been talking about this on the channel prior to this, I've always talked about it as Jesus being the truth. That truth is often translated reality. So our task, if you will, or our willingness to open ourselves to being united with that reality and becoming one with that reality is this issue of obedience of our being before the being of God, being united to the goodness and the being of God. So I really like that. I'm not sure if it was Guardini that said that or if it was Cardinal Ratzinger that said it, but it was in a book about Guardini. So
That's amazing. And to respond to that briefly, it reminds me of something that McLuhan said about the role of the artist. He says, obviously, the business of the artist in the context presented by Joyce is that of an impersonal agent, humble before the laws of things, as well as before his own artistic activity as revealer. He must strip himself of all but his mere agency. And this is in the same essay where McLuhan talks about Christ as the supreme artist, quoting Joyce. The light of thy countenance is signed upon us, O Lord, he quotes from the Psalm 4. And it's also how Guardini opens his essay on Bonaventure, his dissertation. We share the ability to understand with he who is understanding. So when we endeavor to discover truth, we are participating in the divine. How beautiful.
how beautiful. It's been so great talking to you, Peter. I hope we can talk again in the future.
Me too. Thank you.
I'm
This
assuming,
is
I'm
fabulous.
assuming that you participate in that way in your own music with
Oh yeah,
Anna
absolutely.
Monoguchi, yes.
Yeah.
So if you have any links to your music that you want to put in the description section, send them to me.
I
Email.
will. Yeah. yeah,
Yeah.
we have an album that re-released in 2019, which I kind of think goes to a lot of these themes. So
Okay, terrific. Okay, thank you so much.
you got
Have
it.
a wonderful day.
Take care. Bye-bye.